Gentlemen, welcome to the stage. We're almost at the end of the day, so please bear with us. This panel is Beyond the Walled Garden, Making Publishers Great Again. Kick off with some brief introductions. Andrew, should we start with you?
Andrew Casale, President and CEO of Index Exchange. I definitely want to make publishing great again, so I'm happy to be on the panel.
Brilliant.
Nick Hugh, CEO of the Telegraph. It's a bit of a leading question. It implies that the publisher isn't great. It depends how you define great.
Marc, Guldimann, CEO of Parsec, and we want to end CPM.
Okay, 3 bold statements there. I mean, yeah, so Nick, when we spoke a couple of weeks ago, you did mention that about the title of the panel. Are you saying we want to make them great again, or are they ever going to be great again? So just want to be clear that we believe that publishers can and will be great again.
Yeah, so by definition, you're saying that they're not great now. Whereas I would, I'd say it does depend. If you look at revenue or profit quite clearly, it's in the public sphere that many of the publishers have suffered profit challenges over the last few years. But if, on the other hand, you take from the consumer perspective, you can say now, if you look at news, consumption of digital news is up 20% year on year. The average consumer spends an hour and 49 minutes per day accessing news content. Is a greater opportunity to access news content now than there ever has been in the past. So from the eyes of the consumer, it's great.
Would the consumer necessarily agree with you from a usability perspective? If I think Kieran mentioned earlier, visiting a financial website that took 25 seconds to load. Is that, obviously the content is fantastic, but is the value exchange there of kind of, well, for this content, I get all these ads that mean the page just takes a minute to load?
No, so I mean, I've got no idea which financial website. I mean,
I'm speculating.
He's referencing. The only thing I would say, it definitely isn't under the suite of products of the Telegraph.
Well,
thank
of course,
God.
no.
So there's a lot in your statement around the value exchange for the customer. I do think you need to make sure that, particularly for your most valued customers, you're not fatiguing them from an ad perspective. So user experiences have to be right up there.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I completely agree. And I'm sure Andrew and Marc do as well.
Yeah, I would just add to that. I think platforms have to, quite frankly, stop failing media companies. I don't think the issue is media companies at all. I think the rise of programmatic is a good example of platforms really coming in and commanding a ton of the media wallet with their own interests. A platform that is both the vendor to the company and also potentially a seller has a little bit of an objectivity complex there. Platforms that have identity, which marketers want, but are walling that off, is not conducive to an environment that's open and fair and level. So I think the emphasis now is largely on platforms meeting the media companies where they already are. I think that's starting to happen.
And obviously, we're talking about this being beyond the walled gardens. Google and Facebook have a huge role to play in the publisher ecosystem, in the ad tech ecosystem. I don't want this to be a panel bashing Facebook and Google. That's my CEO's job. But what have they driven? Have they driven the state of publishers? I mean, obviously, I'm not saying that publishers are terrible, but there are some people that believe that publishers are having a tough time of it. Should we be blaming Google and Facebook for this?
I think it's easy to blame them. Everyone already has. I don't think that's particularly interesting. I think today it's more of an interest of looking at publisher strategies. I don't think there's going to be any moment in time now where a major media company completely turns their back on Google or Facebook or even Amazon now. Rather, I think what's most important is that people start to create an environment and a strategy that's competitive and fair, because the titans actually can fight each other to a publisher's benefit. Rather than giving them advantages or knocking them or bashing them, which I don't think is particularly healthy anymore.
Yeah, I think the biggest problem that Facebook has introduced is this whole pivot to video, right? So video is much easier for Facebook to monetize just because it's really hard to monetize display. So I think that a lot of publishers are sort of taking that as a signal that they need to move to video. But earlier, you guys both touched on a couple of problems I think that publishers face. One is the user experience, and the other is sort of the tax that a lot of platforms are implementing on publishers. And from the user experience point of view, I think that gets reflected in ad load, right? So when the ads are bad and the formats are bad, publishers can't support ad loads, which are needed to properly monetize their audiences, right? So in digital, we're looking at like 20 to 25% ad load. TV, radio, print, search, and social are all upwards of 50%, right? So you have to fix the crappy quality creative and the formats which are just making the content impossible to consume. And then on the tax side of things, on the platforms taxing the publishers, I think there's two sort of sides to that. The first one we covered this morning, which is the metrics being gamed and sort of like the inability for publishers to actually sell on metrics which reflect the value that they're offering to advertisers. But the second is we've gotten to this place where we sort of accept RTB as the right solution, right? RTB is probably, and I've been working in digital for like 24 years now, RTB is probably the worst protocol that I've ever seen. It's the exposure of every unit of a good to a buyer in order for that buyer to evaluate it. No mature market in the entire world actually operates this way. Nobody flies to Saudi Arabia and knocks on barrels of oil to see if those barrels actually contain a consistent amount of oil. So and one way that you can actually see this reflected is in the TrustX announcement with the ANA, right? So 2 weeks ago, the ANA says we're going to push $50 million through TrustX with a goal of 30% non-working media dollars. That's freaking crazy. Our goal is to be 3 times worse than TV. Like, so the idea that RTB is commonly accepted as the way that we're going to transact, I think, is a fundamentally flawed idea.
I don't really think it's the model so much as like the protocol is very different than the business model. I would agree with you. The business model of ad tech is ridiculous. I think, if we're looking at anything less than single-digit long-term tax, we're kidding ourselves. But I don't think you should be blaming the protocol. I wouldn't agree with that.
Sure. I mean, the protocol is that you inspect every unit of a good, right? Like that just doesn't work. Like, name one other industry in the world where every single unit of a good is inspected by a buyer in order to make a buying decision.
Well, I like to pick up my tomatoes and my fruit. So, like, I think at the end of the day,
you're a consumer in that regard. That's a good example. A supermarket doesn't inspect every tomato that they buy.
You're knocking the fact that we've innovated to the point where we can do something that you can't do in any other industry as being bad. I don't think that's a good way to look at it.
No, I think so.
Not what the supplier does to a certain extent, though. The supplier does do that inspection.
With tomatoes?
Yeah.
No, there's just a common.
I don't know. But I don't know what you do in the States, but in the UK, they have to be pretty uniform.
This is what happens in
something must go on there.
In commodities markets, you have grades of goods, right? And then when you have a good that meets a grade, then you transact on that grade. So RTB was a solution to the problem of every impression being different, right? That's why you have to inspect them, right? You would never inspect every click. Right? You would never, this is why Google can accept orders over an API, right? That's why CPC marketplaces are so much more efficient. You don't actually operate on RTB. You just submit your order via an API, and every click is the same. A click is a click is a click. An impression is not an impression is not an impression.
Okay. I'm not sure where to go with that. So if you're saying that it's fundamentally broken and that the process that we have in place at the moment is wrong, what is the solution? And who should be responsible for fixing it? Should ad tech fix it because they broke it in the first place?
The solution is to move to a metric that has a consistent amount of value.
Yeah.
Right? So, I mean, we're processizing the idea of seconds being consistent, right? But anytime you have a metric that has a consistent amount of value, you don't need to inspect every unit of a good.
So if you bring that back to some of the sessions this morning, like some good points were made. In the end, take this from the brand side, it's about the outcomes. Whether that is footfall in the store, whether it is sales effectiveness, whether it is brand consideration. In the end, whilst, by the way, time spent on the page is obviously more supportive to the business model of publishers, it's actually just another proxy that you're trying to get to the brand outcomes. So I think that's the way that we need ad tech to evolve.
And that's down to using sketchy metrics in the first place, right? I mean, so Dr. Boris saying earlier that you shouldn't be looking at clicks, you shouldn't be looking at impressions, you should be looking far beyond that. That's the time spent is an element of that, surely.
Totally.
Yeah.
So we actually in July we announced that for our content partnerships with advertisers, we'll actually guarantee the results from a sales effectiveness, brand consideration, and so forth. And that was incredibly well received. And it's because it's playing to the end outcome that we're trying to get to now. And obviously, with my background before is very much on the tech side as well, we can be guilty of everything that happens in the middle. In the end, it is outcomes, either on the brand side or on the consumer side.
the problem there is that if you're selling outcomes, you're assuming the risk, right? So if I'm a publisher and I'm selling someone showing up at a car dealer, I'm actually assuming the risk that the lot's inviting, that the cars look good, that all these things that are out of my control, I'm assuming risk for. So what happens then is I price that in, right? And so it just makes it more expensive.
At the end of the day, though, you're always going to have some risk. Like even today, we sell impressions, which you clearly don't like. But there's still risk. Every agency has a viewability goal, a fraud goal, an on-target goal.
I missed that. That's very good, yeah. NCPM guys.
There's still going to be risk, no matter what you sell. Even if you sell seconds, you're still going to have risk.
Yeah, okay. Yeah. That went way off base very quickly. I'm going to bring it back to Google and Facebook just briefly. And Nick, I want to ask you if, obviously, they seem to be a blessing and a curse of publishers. And that depends more, I guess, if you're a digital-first publisher versus one of the more traditional publishers like Telegraph. Do you think that publishers have been guilty of blaming them for the demise of the publishing industry, but at the same time ceding too much content to those platforms in the first place?
So I'm not going into any Google or Facebook bashing here. I do, though, believe
and other
they have been.
I
believe platforms as a whole have been very helpful on one side, in terms of some of the metrics that I mentioned earlier. And let's bring another platform that hasn't been mentioned as many times, but Snapchat. So we've been publishing on Snapchat for a few months now. It's give or take 4 or 5 million users in the UK accessing it every day. 2/3 of those are aged between 13 and 21, something like that. And those are with the best will in the world, not your typical Telegraph reader. So that's great. From a monetization perspective, it's never going to be the same as it was when we're on the Telegraph. And obviously the challenge that we have is that you're seeing a disproportionately greater growth in the consumption on third-party platforms, and therefore that generates the monetization challenge. Sure. So it's a bit of both. But in the end, we'd actually be in a worse position if we didn't have Google and Facebook now. But then we also do a lot of work with Apple, and so we're the official reseller for Apple News in the UK, and that gives us a slightly different vantage point as well. But again, incredibly additive from a distribution perspective, some challenges from a monetization perspective. But I think every publisher needs to look at those as some form of, essentially as an extension of your own marketing efforts. And one of the things we do a lot with the Googles and Facebooks of the world is actually how do we use that to try and drive more registrations and subscriptions, and therefore play into our core business model and be able to use those as ways to attract into our own platform. And certainly Google and Facebook and Apple as well are very receptive to that, particularly given the furor of fake news and so forth in the past.
I'd also say it's a question of control. I think Google and Facebook add a tremendous amount of value to publishers. They drive a ton of traffic. From what we can see, they drive a lot of revenue too. But I think the issue comes up when it comes to the business model of publishing and who has control over decisions. If you even look at header, we can call it whatever we want. We can call it a hack, a trick. It doesn't really matter. We fundamentally decoupled a key decision from Google, which was the unified auction. It is now in control of the publisher. Maybe at some point it will recede back to the ad server, but if it does, you can be certain that it never will without the same oversight and transparency as we've been able to achieve through the header. So I think it largely comes down to control when it's working with any of these Titan-class companies.
And so Marc, I'm going to come back to you, and I'm probably going to regret it, because it's going to confuse the hell out of me again. You're kind of very obviously very interested in the economics behind publishing and kind of what the value. We talked a lot about value exchange earlier, and from your perspective, it's you. When we spoke before, you mentioned about you are basically a loan company, and you are loaning the user is loaning you their attention.
Well, I don't think we're not a loan company, but publishing is fundamentally.
I don't mean you as in Parsec. Yeah.
So, I mean, media is fundamentally about a publisher capturing consumer attention with content and then loaning that attention to an advertiser. That advertiser puts their message on it, and then hopefully there's some attention that's shifted back to the publisher so the process begins again. The problem is, in a typical loan market, the price of that loan it's basically a factor of the amount of goods being loaned and the counterparty credit risk, right? In digital marketing, we have no idea what counterparty credit risk is. We have no, and I think you can approximate counterparty credit risk as sort of the quality of advertising. So there's no way today for a publisher to look at different ads and price them differently based on quality, right? So if you and I both make a TV spot, 30-second TV spot, and as you can probably tell, my TV spot would suck, everybody would change the channel, people would love your TV spot. They make the most beautiful TV spot, people lean in. Why are we paying the same for that TV spot, right? And even in display, a lot of times the worst ad on the page will actually pay the least amount to get there. So that doesn't make any sense at all. What we really want to do is to enable publishers to start to look at the quality of the advertising that's running on their site and adjust pricing based on that.
Should we be looking at a paid search model of having obviously a bid model plus quality score on top to ensure that the advertisers that can't afford to bid as high as the top dogs actually get a chance because the quality of their ad is that good? Exactly. How easy is that to do?
Not easy at all. Like you have to change everything, the entire model of everything in digital right now to achieve that. I would say if you look at what's happening, the response is already here. There's horrible ads on the web. Completely agree with that. Mm-hmm. Now we have ad blocking. What's following that? The browsers are stepping in. And what are the browsers going to do? They're going to strip all the bad off the web. You're not going to be allowed to serve something bad anymore.
The browser can detect the quality of creative?
Absolutely. It is the easiest problem of any browser to be able to solve instantly because it has to render the creative. So it can know the CPU time, the render time, the payload.
That doesn't have anything to do with how
we were largely talking about user experiences. So if you're talking about the impact of creative, it's not a digital problem. You have to be talking to creative agencies, but that's not fundamentally part of the digital ad tech ecosystem.
Sure it is. The quality of the creative that a publisher puts on their site has a direct impact on how people consume their content. I mean, look at what Vox has done. Look at what Quartz has done. They've taken a lot of their creative in-house because of this problem. And so what we're trying to do is to create an economic model for publishers to help them understand the quality of the creative. And when you move to time, it's as easy as looking as how long people choose to spend with advertising. And it might seem foreign and different, but it's actually a lot more common than you might think. Look at skippable ads on YouTube. They're already doing this, right? Look at in-feed ads on Facebook. They're already doing this. All you need to do is to have an ad experience where the consumer chooses how long they're going to pay attention to something. Then you can take that time and use it as a derivative of quality.
I don't for a second disagree with publishers providing creative services at all. They know their audience better than everybody. I think that's super smart. So a lot of our clients do that.
Okay, interesting. So how can ad tech actually help the publisher? It feels we're in a position where the ad tech ecosystem has driven the demise of publishers. Now they have to build it back up again. Are they going to then get the credit for doing that when it's like setting fire to your neighbour's house and then going and saving them and then claiming yourself as a hero? It's a weird analogy, but I'll stick with it.
Do you want
to? So I'm going to...
It's been a long day, I'm sorry.
I'm not going to answer the very last bit of that question, but so I do think it would be helpful if the ad tech ecosystem as a whole can help place more of a value on context within the actual algorithms. That I think is completely underrepresented today, and certainly going from Yahoo to a company like the Telegraph has helped me see that very starkly. In the end, investigative journalism comes at a significant cost, and it's obviously in the interest of society and this is broader than the Telegraph, that continues. The business model of the publisher is under pressure from that perspective. So that's one thing. The second one I'd say, and this is in the end actually mostly the responsibility of historically it's because of actions that publishers have chosen, but you tend to find with many of the news publishers there's no need for the user to log in, and so actually users are generally anonymous, and the value of anonymity declines by the day, and we heard in a couple of the earlier panels, identified users are worth disproportionately more. And that is a challenge that I think particularly all traditional media owners have to resolve, and have to resolve quickly. And if you can, then I think it creates great opportunity, and GDPR in many ways longer term helps us with that. Then I think it creates great opportunity from which publishers will be able to prosper. And
that is with your own individual, say, Telegraph logins rather than kind of the universal one login from the likes of Facebook or Google. Is that the approach?
No, I'm talking about our own. In the end, we have direct relationships with, I want to say, well, they're consumers. In a shop analogy, they're visitors, but they're not necessarily customers. The challenge for us is to move as many of them to be customers and have some form of direct identified relationship as opposed to direct and anonymous.
I would say ad tech has to get out of the way and get out of the spotlight if we're going to help our media company publisher clients. It's not about us at all, and I think ad tech takes way too much credit for what it does. Journalism costs money. I've walked a lot of newsrooms. It's not cheap, and you can't compare everybody on the open sea of web in a uniform way just based on audience. It's completely false. They don't drive the same impact. I think where we can help is through innovation. I think one of the innovations that we're pushing hard on, I think a lot of people in ad tech are, is trying to level the advantage over identity right now. There aren't a lot of people that log into each individual publisher the way they do into social platforms, which creates a completely distorted economic dynamic when you either have identity or when you do not. I think we should completely level the advantage of identity. I think that's going to require a ton of cooperation across the ecosystem, but there is a big advantage to come out of that. And I think one of the biggest steps has already happened in that we've unified, or many publishers have unified their strategies such that there is no more single vendor advantage. Not even the duopoly has a single vendor advantage anymore at the top of the waterfall. That should, in effect, create a dynamic whereby the market will normalize prices and taxes. So I think we're already on a course, and I think we've seen that with some of the changes in ad tech toward a fair value or a fair cost for the value that's being provided by platforms to their customers. So a lot of things still have to happen, but I do believe ad tech has to get out of the way. Like, nobody really talks about NYSE. You just buy stocks. And people talk a lot about ad tech a little bit too much. We talk about ourselves too much. I don't think that's going to continue long term if we're going to make this work.
I didn't hear the word you said about buying socks. No one talks about who?
The New York Stock Exchange.
Oh,
NYSE.
right.
Sorry.
I've never heard of it.
We call it NYSE.
Yeah, I thought you said socks rather than stocks,
well,
so you completely confused me there.
I love buying.
No, you're absolutely right.
I love buying socks too for panels, but the underlying
control.
stock exchange.
Yeah, no, that's NYSE. I've never.
My bad. Sorry.
So I think this is where we agree. I think we have to get out of the way. We have to quit with like the fetishization of formats. Like, there's no reason for display to have 50 different formats. There's no reason for people to have press releases about making 100 different formats. Every other medium that's been successfully monetized in the history of the world has used one format: TV, radio, print, search, and social. They all use a single format. And so I think that by getting out of this idea to have 5,000 different types of ad formats, I think we can simplify things for everybody: publishers, advertisers, and consumers.
I'm not sure I agree about those different channels using one singular format versus display, because I can think of myriad formats across each of those platforms. Are you referring to the way that they are?
Yeah, I mean, you look at TV.
Created,
TV has a 30-second
executed,
spot, right? Print has a
under
full-page ad.
15, under 10, under
sponsorship.
under sponsorship.
But
yeah.
the vast majority is through 30-second spots,
Yeah.
right? Same with print. You have other formats, but the vast majority of print is through full-page ads, and radio is 15 seconds. So I think that we should just simplify things and stop like just trying to build new novel formats, and instead just build better creative.
Yeah, I mean, that I'm sure absolutely everyone can agree with. What role should the buy side be playing in helping the publisher, from your perspectives?
As a publisher, and I'm sure the vast majority would be of the same view, we want the transparency from the ad tech side, because actually that gives us but transparency and the technology, but not just around bid landscape, but some of the other things that have been mentioned earlier on. But that gives us the ability to be able to connect directly with the buyers, whether that is agency or client side. So if and when that technology arrives to be able to do that in full transparency, end to end, we want the ability to be able to have that discussion directly with the buyer.
I'd love for there to be more transparency into the why. Talking specifically about RTV for a second, which I know you don't like. We don't really know why bidders bid. We can kind of speculate, but we don't know why. And if they shared more of that information with publishers, publishers could probably respond with experiences or executions that are more conducive to that result. Instead, we speculate. We see a $50 bid and we smile, but we don't know why. We'd love to know why, and I think our customers would too. loops. So if there's more information sharing, you can get to that end result too of, was there an engagement? Did somebody buy something? Because then we can trace back the why and perhaps try to make some correlations. Right now, it's a bit of a black box.
And what role can SPO, supply path optimization, help the publisher? We established earlier the buy side haven't got a clue what it is. But from the publisher perspective, kind of how can SPO, I mean, obviously talking about, how can it help improve relationships across the entire ecosystem?
Well, it helps us be able to connect with them, but also theoretically, and to date has done, helps us improve yield as well. Yield and revenue, I should say.
It's choice. At the end of the day, SPO to me is choice. I think Brian O'Kelly coined the acronym, but it's philosophically been completely in alignment with everything header represents since the beginning of header, which is just don't have one single vendor with an advantageous position. Create a unified auction that a publisher can control and compare. And that in and of itself is conducive to value generation. We don't know the exact percentage of lift that each publisher may have received through the adoption, but we know universally there's been lift. And I think that's what choice drives.
And ultimately, so I guess it's, you mentioned earlier about giving the publisher back control. Would you all agree that things are improving and the publisher is regaining control and kind of we're kind of on the right path now, or is there still a long way to go?
Long way to go.
Long way to go.
Huge way to go. But the only thing I'd say is, certainly at the Telegraph, I don't think we're going to wait as such. And so the longer term strategy for us and for most publishers actually is to diversify away from advertising. And by that, I don't mean that we expect it to continue to decline inexorably into the future. But if we want to ensure a secure future for ourselves, it's actually building up some of our other businesses. And my firm view is within 3 to 5 years, particularly if we get the identity piece right, within 3 to 5 years, our commerce businesses will be worth significantly more than our advertising business.
And many UK publishers like the Telegraph have different hubs, right? So you've got, say, job sites, content platforms, different ways of being able to monetize inventory in different ways.
I think at the core of that always has to sit the USP of the company. So for us, it's quality journalism. And against our user base, it's mainly around travel, financial services, one or two other areas. But it's also the ability to be able to have a lot of live solutions, whether that's events for advertisers or for customers and so forth. I think those things are just as fundamental, if not more fundamental, to their future success. But again, at the heart of all of this, it's the ability to be able to recognise your customers across multiple devices as well as in real life.
Absolutely, and customer probably isn't the word we use enough in the ad tech industry. But anyway, Marc, your final thoughts on kind of what the journey ahead could be, is?
So I think the journey ahead, I think giving publishers control over specifically what runs on their site is the most important thing, right? Simplifying the number of formats and then giving publishers an ability to do price discrimination based on the quality of the creative that's running.
On that note, we're out of time, but I really want to say thank you to the three of you, Andrew, Nick, Marc. It's been fun. Thanks, guys.